games of questions. I'm sure you've got tons of questions, and the speakers themselves may have questions. So, who wants to go first? Maureen.
Would you mind telling me what the union stance is on 0-hour contracts, please?
The union stance?
Yes.
Well, I think most unions are opposed to 0-hour contracts.
And that's it.
As far as I know, I
some
can't.
kind of argument that people are better on a 0-hour contract than not working at all. And no contract. So I just wondered if there was a strong.
Well, as far as I know, I don't think any. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think any union leader would say that. I mean, it's an argument. And not a very good one.
No, it's been a very powerful campaign. Actually, really sort of mobilising campaign at the level of the TUC, but within unions, completely against it. But also because it has political leverage. Because do you remember the Labour Party made it part of their policy to completely get rid of 0-hour contracts, and there was a bit of debate. The problem is the broader debate about precarity. So it's true to say that we could live without 0-hour contracts, but then we're still having to deal with other forms of precarious work, like fixed-term contracts, like the lack of trade in the health service, for example. Nobody who's a temp or an agency worker, for example, will get training. The big issue in health and social care, which again the unions haven't quite made enough fuss about, because it's a less clear issue, is about the issue of contract and agency labour. So we call that sometimes externalisation of the employment relationship, because it's very complicated what happens when agencies or third parties come into the employment relationship, because there's all kinds of sort of confusions about who is responsible for what at that point. I used to work for the Miners International, so mining and oil trade unions in the world sort of joined them, and one of the big arguments against precarious work and contract and agency labour is the impact that it has on health, safety and the environment. More accidents happen when you have agency or contract labour. Why? Because people don't talk to each other. We know that Piper Alpha happened. 145 of the people that were killed in Piper Alpha were contract workers. And it causes big risks, both in terms of environmental risk, but also health and safety of the people working there, because people don't talk to each other. They don't have a normal relationship where they say, oh, that machine's not working today, you need to give it a push here. So there's been a long-running research, particularly around health, safety and environment, which shows that these precarious work forms not only are bad for working people, because there tends to be a huge income insecurity, a lack of pensions, lack of blah, 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 but also in terms of quality of the outcomes. So in the health service, there's a direct link between the use of contract and agency labour and patient care, for example. So this is a big part of it's a good sort of alliance, I think, between professional bodies and trades unions and organisations like the Green Party, where the research has been there. A lot of it comes from Australia, interestingly, that there is a direct link between all of our political and professional targets and the use of precarious work.
I meet a lot of people, you see, who are not necessarily in a precarious position as far as accidents or anything like that, are mostly sort of administration type people working at them, and that are working on 0-hour contracts.
Yeah.
And I never know what to say to them, quite honestly.
It's a tough thing for the unions, because they will say we'll join a union, but unfortunately, of course, they may be in a very vulnerable position if they collectivise as well. But even in admin, of course, admin makes a big difference to health and safety. It does in hospitals, because if you've got someone who doesn't type in the notes properly or doesn't send an appointment card, that has a very important impact.
Yeah, they're not health workers. They're just.
But that's how it was introduced, wasn't it? It was introduced with ancillary services, catering, admin, the things that apparently didn't make any difference at all. And then we're into borderline things like maintenance of equipment,
So we're getting a bigger green presence in our local TUC. It's about 7 or 8 of us. We go regularly every month.
Great.
We've done things with Unite Union, supporting people who have problems. Somebody was evicted, losing their house because he was £2,000 in arrears in council tax. Some of it was the council's fault, letters, and he was given £49,000 legal fees.
Wow.
Where the interest should really have been at the most, £3,500.
Wow.
Anybody else questions? Liz, you wanted to ask Dave, should
Yeah,
he said something didn't you?
I did. Because I lived abroad for a long time and I came back to the UK and I couldn't work out what was going on politically at all in this country. This was 8 years ago. And there were two issues that really sort of struck out, particularly from a trade union perspective. One was climate change and one was mental health. There was a lot of movement on these two things. I became a green rep from my university and we got involved in the campaign against climate change, which produced, as you said, this amazing report, which was the first time that the kind of business case had been made for creating I think they called them climate jobs rather than green jobs, didn't they?
Yeah.
Because they wanted to make the distinction about how this was going to change industry and we had to sort of embrace these new industries and then train people. And they costed it out and they said, well, this will save X amount in terms of welfare, we can build up the apprentice scheme. It was all there, got some interest. The TUC reluctantly initially took it on, but then it started to build interest. And then it just seemed to die. It just seemed to go away.
Well, I mean, it's still around in the sense that one thing I've got to do, I'm in the process of doing, is filming the last campaign editing the videos of the last campaign against climate change conference, which took place earlier this month in Sheffield, and that's got some fascinating speakers, and particularly around issues like TTIP. And but they're producing. I think there's another edition of the pamphlet on its way.
Right.
What I've just been looking at the paper and looking at the accounts of Corbyn's speech, because at one stage, about a month ago, people were saying, "Oh, Corbyn said he likes the 1 million climate jobs number. That's his policy." And I don't seem to find any mention of climate issues in either Corbyn or McDonald's speech, which is worrying me. But, I mean, it definitely hasn't gone away, and I think it is. I mean, I think the sort of bad boys are bad, not necessarily boys, are basically, I have to say, Prospect and the GMB. The unions who I would say are probably least enthusiastic about the climate change agenda. But as I said, there are various climate change agendas, and quite a lot of them, interestingly enough, involve nuclear power.
But the other thing was that the investment in these jobs wasn't secured, because there was lots of conferences, weren't there, with various sort of stakeholders, and there was, I can't remember the name of it, was this something like Green Bank or something, which was an attempt to raise the funding to fund.
Yeah, as far as I
jobs.
know, it hasn't, none of it, or it has been enacted. It's been in sort of very localised and limited, like experimental projects. But as a whole, the agenda, no, it hasn't.
No.
And I was sort of, I didn't think Corbyn was going to take it up immediately, but I would have liked to mention. But anyway, maybe we'll get it.
I think part of the problem is that there is an incentive to be conservative with a small c, because those people who have jobs in current industries, including nuclear weapons industries, are identifiable. They know who they are, and they want their union to defend them. Whereas those people in future industries don't exist. So there's no lobbying power inside the union to make sure that actually there's a positive change here. So that's why you get Unite and others defending Trident and stopping there being a vote in Labour Party conference. It's not that they're malign, it's that there's this internal incentive to protect the existing jobs rather than create new ones.
But it's interesting, yeah, I agree with you, but it's a kind of lazy politics,
Yeah.
because sustainability has been around for a long time. And I used to work with the Colombian coal miners, Sintra Carbon, for about 10 years. And, because they're one of the biggest exporters to Europe of coal. They have huge issues around contract and agency labour. 4,000 of their 8,000 miners are contractors, which is also, unfortunately, connected to paramilitary activity and military financing. It's a really complicated political situation. This little union, Sintra Carbon, is a remarkable trades union. It was the first union to take up organising contract workers and trying to deal with child labour in the mines. The first union in Latin America to do that, given all of the risks to their lives, actually.
Yeah.
It's the most dangerous place in the world. Interestingly, a few months ago, they came back to London. They did a world tour because they're now lobbying against the expansion of the mine on environmental grounds, on sustainability grounds. So it's just one union. It is a remarkable union. I have written about them as a case study because you couldn't make it up. It's the most least likely leader in terms of environmental change. But actually they've taken it. But it's just one example, unfortunately, because always the leadership is less progressive than the membership, and you see that a lot in trades unions, even in this country. So it's not worth giving up though, because there is this conservative trend at organisational national leadership level, but amongst the membership it's a matter of survival to have these conversations. It's a question of how we get them out, really.
Steve?
Yes, questions for Paul. 3 questions.
Oh, wow.
Fairly simple. Are there any countries at the moment on the verge of getting nuclear weapons? Are there any significant voices in the military against Trident? And have you had any conversations with Jeremy Corbyn lately?
Okay.
Thank you.
So the first, the country that is most on the verge is North Korea. It has exploded 3 nuclear weapons tested, but we don't think that they have deliverable weapons. They could deliver them in a container, as in a lorry, but not in an aircraft. But they're not far away. They may even be there by now. So North Korea. Other than them, there isn't another country on the verge. India, Pakistan came out in 1998. Israel, everyone thinks they have a large number, 200 or so. There's a lot of talk about Saudi Arabia in response to Iran. Saudi Arabia are closer to having a nuclear weapon than Iran is, but that's simply by virtue of buying it from the Pakistanis, who they funded in the first place to get nuclear weapons. But then again, it would be very difficult politically for the Pakistanis to sell to Saudi Arabia, given that they have a big and important border with Iran. So it's all very complicated, but there are no countries in the immediate wings, so to speak. But if there was some strong suspicion that the Iranians were to get close and then cross the border, then I think the Saudis would throw all money at it, and they could well develop. So it's more a question of, we're not on the edge, we're not near the edge, even Iran's not near the edge, despite what people say, but they could be in, say, 10, 15, 20 years' time. This agreement puts them back some time, and but it doesn't stop it. And so maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the line, we could well see more proliferation. And at that point, it could go quite quickly. So it could be Iran, it could be Saudi Arabia, it could be Turkey. three countries. But there's no other states in the wings waiting, other than Japan. Japan could put a nuclear weapon together, I think, in weeks, not months. It has all the technology, it has the fissile material, it's all sitting there. And if you go to Beijing, they will tell you that the Japanese quite deliberately have this policy of being on the edge. But nobody else believes it because they're allies to Japan. But you know, if intents shift in Tokyo, then they could do it in weeks.
That's reassuring then.
Yes. That's the first question.
Yes.
The second question, which is why it's so important to recognise that if we justify having nuclear weapons on the basis that there's some vague uncertainty in 20 years' time, why the hell can't any other country? So that's the first question. Second question was...
Significant voices in the military?
Significant voices in the military.
Against?
They're all retired, they're all in the House of Lords, and they're all from the army. But there are, yes. There are 3 or 4. General David Ramsbottom, Patrick Cordingley, names you might know. Lord Bramall, although he's just left the House of Lords. All of these, and others, Hugh Beach, they're all army senior generals of some kind or another. But there's been, I've tried so hard. I've had Charles Guthrie, who was a recent Chief of Defence Staff, and others talking about this, and getting them to jump over and argue the case has been really challenging, and certainly no serving general. And then the final question was
Mr.
Corbyn. Yes, no, I haven't talked to Jeremy Corbyn yet. I was very close to Ed Miliband's team, and I'd actually spent 2 years getting to the right people and briefing them on a regular weekly basis in the SNP, in Ed Miliband's team, and in the Liberal Democrats, ready for a coalition government. And if there had been a coalition government, we could very easily have delayed it and ran it into the sands in the longer term. They wouldn't have agreed to ditch it, but they would have agreed. They were already in place to agree to another 5-year delay and further reviews and the like. But history wasn't on our side. Corbyn, I do have links. I've talked to him on a number of occasions. It's much more difficult to talk to him these days. So I have to go indirectly, and today I've authored a piece in the Huffington Post which will get to him, advising him along the lines that I was talking about today, about finding ways of reframing the debate so that it's not just simply a yes/no morality against realism, but actually to start from the beginning and have a debate not on do we support Trident or not, because the Labour Party will divide on that, but how do we ensure that Britain plays a strong leadership role internationally, and then what does the decision on Trident imply?
And also saying that it's basically saying they don't work as well.
Well, exactly.
They don't work.
Exactly.
Too big, and also
Yeah.
the moral responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
But my fear is I mean, you see it in the media all the time. The way it's being framed at the moment is you're against Trident, you're hard left. It's identity politics, and we've lost already on that. Because you're hard left or you're green, and that kind of suits us, or some of us sometimes, because we like to wear badges and we like to feel clear, strong in our position. But it means we lose the debate in the end. And so I guess what I'm trying to urge us to do is to see that while we feel comfortable where we are, we need to win this one. This is really important. And actually, if we do win it, this will be good for the Green Party. So it's win-win.
Yes, I've been down to Burfield recently and on a CND demo, and well, twice, and it's hugely clear if you go there, and hardly anybody does. I mean, I've never been until 18 months ago. I've never been anywhere near it. But there are cranes everywhere. There is a huge amount of money being spent right now on preparing for replacing Trident. And so there's this danger that we get to the point where people argue that they've spent so much already that then it's inevitable on that it's not a question, it's a further point of information. And so I think one of the values of people going down there is to actually see that and learn what that is like on that. You know, it's a separate argument about this. I mean, also Dr. Rebecca Johnson was saying that now the Trident budget is no longer ring-fenced. It's sort of in with other military spending, which possibly might give a bit more leverage in military terms, in terms of the, you can argue that actually that spending means that small and precise and the body armour and the right weapons and the right ammunition for the soldiers there are actually more important than Trident and is actually more effective. But that's sort of quite a detailed argument on that.
It doesn't appeal to me, but it will appeal to the sort of people that we're trying to reach.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
And of course, you know, the Green Party sits in a broader set of groups, and so we don't have to make all the arguments, but those arguments need to be made, and that's a very clear one. And it was a decision by George Osborne. We have George Osborne to thank for that. It wasn't Tony Blair that wanted to do that. In fact, it was the policy of the previous government to fund it from outside of the Ministry of Defence. It was one of George Osborne's first decisions 3 months after he became Chancellor. But your point about the spending is really well taken, because right here, right now, cost is on our side.
Yes.
But within the next 5 years, it will be on the other side. We will have a tipping point when, this is psychological, it's not rational.
Yes.
It's what I call the Concord fallacy.
Yes.
Concord was reviewed at several points along its development, and at each point it was rational to abandon the project because it was too expensive going forward, but that would have required them to write off the investment that had already been made. Nobody was willing to put their political life on the line or their career on the line by saying, yes, it was a mistake, it was a waste of money, we should just ditch the project. And that will happen with Trident, even though in 5 years' time they'll still have spent only 30% or so of the project. It's still going to be, it's £8 billion, and we're not willing to say goodbye to that.
Can I ask you something, Paul? This is indirectly related to nuclear weapons. Most people in the Green Party are anti-nuclear. That means anti-nuclear power as well. But I think power stations will continue in use. The medics want them for cancer treatment and such like. All sorts of businesses want low-level radioactive things for tracers. And those can be provided by small reactors, but there's a reason to keep the big power reactors going, which is that this country holds more plutonium than any other country in the world, as far as I know, as far as I'm told, because of all the reprocessing we've done. There's a very small use for plutonium power in spacecraft. Apart from that, it's bombs and power stations, right? So we need to keep the big power stations going to burn up the plutonium. And the stuff's so dangerous that it's not safe to just bury it somewhere. So in terms of avoiding proliferation, it would pay to just get plutonium into power stations. But the way things are done at the moment, you use a mixed oxide fuel and it generates more plutonium than you started off with. So we need to get power stations built which actually burn surplus plutonium, and there aren't many. There's talk of molten salt reactors, but people seem reluctant to build them or test them at the moment. They just keep on wanting to do pressurised water reactors. Now, coming to this Hinkley Point thing, I assume this overlaps with your work to some extent. What's not talked about the Hinkley Point thing is that proposed reactor is supposed to burn plutonium as well as uranium. It can burn various fuels, including plutonium, so that even if it's poor economically, which people have thought for some time, and the cost keeps going up, and the argument is it will cost twice as much for the electricity as any other form, but as a fairly reliable source of base load, if it ever gets built, and it burns plutonium, it could be worth supporting it. But that argument isn't much in circulation. I just wonder if you've got any opinion on that.
It is on the edge of my work, but I worked very closely with a guy called Frank Barnaby in the 90s and early 2000s, who did a lot of work on this issue. And there is an organisation called the International Panel on Fissile Materials, which I've advised in the past.
So which material?
The International Panel on Fissile Materials,
okay,
which includes plutonium, uranium, and the like. And the assessment, even in the 90s, and things have changed and become even more so, was that MOX was highly uneconomic, and we spent a lot of money in this country building Thorpe, and that was a complete disaster and a white elephant, which we predicted back in 1992, and it was even more of a white elephant than we even predicted. My suspicion is that we are still quite a long way away from the possibility of burning plutonium successfully in reactors such that we get rid of the, as you quite rightly say, huge stockpile. We and the French have basically 80% of the world's stockpile of plutonium, and that's civil plutonium. And I think in the end, I mean, what Frank Barnaby came to conclude at the end is that we have to work out ways of vitrifying it, which classifying, putting it, and then finding really effective ways of putting it deep in the ground, and guarding it, and just accepting that this is a cost that is ongoing effectively forever, because of the mistakes that we've made in the past. But the danger of burning it is not only is it hugely expensive, but it creates even more radioactive waste, which is really challenging and is extraordinarily expensive. But I wouldn't claim direct expertise in this area, so I'm only reporting the views of somebody I trust very, very strongly, because he's somebody I've worked very closely with.
Okay, it's just that the proponents of molten salt reactors reckon it will genuinely burn plutonium and other radioactive waste a lot more safely than the pressurised water reactors that are proposed and built at the moment.
Yeah, I've no doubt about that one for comparison, but I need to look more into it to see if it's a realistic solution.
Okay.
Do we know what happens to the Japanese nuclear waste?
Well, it used to be the case that we would accept it all, because these were under contracts connected to the thermal oxide reprocessing plant Thorpe, I mean, it was really interesting discussions I had with the Japanese and with the guy who was responsible at BNFL, British Nuclear Fuels, for the security, because they were basically shipping all this plutonium from Japan to Britain in a ship with a single gun on the front and sailing them through pirate areas and all sorts. And it wouldn't take much to hire a highly trained team to take all that plutonium, and then God knows where they'd be. So, but now the Japanese have, for years and years and years, been investing in a new plant themselves at Rokoshu And I believe that that is either just about to come online or has just come online, so they're dealing with their own plutonium. But most of their plutonium still sits in Britain because of the historic legacy Thorpe contracts that we signed 20 years ago.
What a legacy for our
I think
children.
it was offered back to them, but
Yeah,
they
they
didn't want
wouldn't
to take
take
it.
it.
Yes.
And there were several shipments of mixed oxide fuel that was so bad they couldn't use them. So they said we're not willing to take any more until you sort out your supply line. And of course our supply line has completely died because the plant that we invested billions of pounds in, it was the largest engineering project in this country other than the Channel Tunnel, and it's not been able to produce anything. That's the sort of level of scale of waste.
Are they still taking it by train?
In Germany,
Through Wilston.
Oh, Wilston.
It's nuclear
I don't know.
Is
Yes,
there
there
still
are.
Yeah.
Nuclear trains
Oh,
testing.
right.
I imagine because the
Yes.
reactors are still going.
Yes.
Dungeon House and places like this.
Yes, the trains still come through on the Barking Gospel line through North London.
Lots of people are taking leaflets about that and reading them.
Mm.
And they've been
To
amazed
do
at
shop
where that's
leaflet,
happening.
yeah.
Yeah, that is happening.
Yeah, I haven't had a protest about that for years now.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
maybe we should dust off some of those
Yeah,
leaflets.
well, I think so.
And they were parking us overnight in over your way. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
From down the end of my road, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Russians have been trying to persuade the Bulgarians to build a nuclear
Mm-hmm.
plant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what will happen there. There is some resistance to it. I don't know how effective that will be. But are the Russians planning to build it anywhere else?
Oh yes, all over the place. The
Oh.
Russians are probably the most significant nuclear exporters today, along with the South Koreans. Between the two of them, they've set up a lot of developing country markets. Although, of course, the Chinese are relatively new on the block when it comes to exports, they probably will overtake the Russians and the South Koreans.
Not in Africa. Are they?
They're all in it.
Because, I mean, I understand
What a
that.
dreadful place.
Yeah, my understanding of the argument against investing in new kinds of nuclear plants is that it won't keep the lights on because it takes so long to build them, and quite apart from being so experimental, that other crises will happen first. They won't fill a gap in the supply of power. That it's just, the timing does not work, quite apart from anything else. And the proliferation of even more waste.
I have an idea, alternatively, connected to the renewables, which is, I've been trying to advise the Iranian government. I used to be a talk show host on Iranian TV, and I've been trying to advise them that they've been falling into the trap of responding to the unjust demands of the international community and investing far too much in nuclear because they've been told they can't. It's very teenager behaviour. When rationally they should be investing in renewables, not only because they have huge potential in Iran, massive solar index,
Yes.
etc., but also they could export the technology and create relationships and then export the Islamic Revolution, if that's what they want to do, using solar power.
Yes.
And
Make friends.
yeah, exactly. And they were really interested when I first started doing this back in 2008, and I was commissioned by a couple of government officials to write a report, which I duly did, and they were very keen and they liked it. And then a few weeks later, it all went quiet, and I realised that the reason why was because one of the other qualities of solar power is that it gets people out of dependency on the state, because they put their solar panels on their roofs. They're not dependent on the state
That's right.
anymore. It's very empowering,
That's the problem in Bulgaria.
and they don't like it.
They don't like it.
So, what we need to be doing is making relationships and connections with people, not governments, but people in these countries around the Middle East and sell them renewable energy and try to get renewable energy being taken more seriously, not just for environmental reasons, but for deeply political reasons, because we need to be taking the power away from the governments. And that is just as strong in Iran as it is in Saudi Arabia and all these other countries. It's a deeply political...
Yeah, it's the political thing.
And UK
Yes,
as
yeah,
well.
oh yeah. I think we also do.
And interestingly enough, Turkey is absolutely smothered in solar power.
No. And I can tell
So
you
that
from
has
direct
an
experience that virtually none of these Middle East countries are. I mean, I fly into these
absolutely
places,
right.
I don't see any solar power.
And the same in Bulgaria.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Right, I think we're finished for the moment. Have we got some wine and things?